My name is Dr. Rain Rouse. I am a physician scientist and leukemia and lymphoma specialist at Texas Children's Hospital in Houston, Texas.
Hi, I'm Courtney. I'm a bone marrow donor, and today I'm going to be watching a video by Dr. Rouse, who's going to be describing the bone marrow donation process, and I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my experience.
Once a donor has been identified as a bone marrow donor, they undergo a physical exam. This is usually at a clinic or a hospital or collection site, and this is to ensure that they are healthy enough to undergo the process. Bone marrow donation actually does require a minor outpatient surgery. Each and every bone marrow donor will have a designated advocate throughout the entire experience.
So once I was selected for bone marrow donation, I had to go under a series of tests. One was a physical exam, which was pretty straightforward. And then over the course of a few weeks leading up to my donation, I had to do pregnancy checking tests every week, urinalysis, testing, making sure I was as healthy as possible going into the donation process.
The actual process, the surgical procedure of donating bone marrow, involves the donor being laid face down, and again, they will be asleep, so they won't remember any of this, and the bone marrow transplant physician or surgeon taking a tiny needle and making a tiny slit that's about 1/4 of an inch in the hip bone through the back, and place a tiny hollow needle there that will draw out some of the liquid bone marrow. This process is the actual bone marrow donation and can take anywhere between 30 minutes and an hour, depending on how much bone marrow is needed.
So on the day of my donation, I arrived at the hospital about 5 a.m. with my companion, and we walked into the hospital. We were greeted by hospital staff, and so I was escorted to the place where I could get changed and get situated for the doctor to come in, who had been with me, telling me things from the beginning of the process. All the nurses were there telling me that they'd be making sure that I was comfortable during the whole process. I was given a sedative, and so I had almost been completely asleep by the time that I got to the operating room, and the anesthesiologist had me count backwards from 10, and I don't know which point I fell asleep, but I was completely asleep from during the process. Everything went really fast and well, and that was great. And then after, I was moved to the recovery area, where I was there for about another 2 hours, and then after that I was able to go home.
It's important to know that any cost associated with donation of bone marrow or peripheral blood stem cells is covered. This includes travel, this includes any inconvenience, this includes the medical costs. This is not something that is going to be an out-of-pocket cost to the donor.
My companion that they allowed me to have with me to provide me comfort during the process did have to travel and be the match, paid for her to travel to me and for a hotel for us to stay in, and paid for our meals and made sure that we had everything that we needed on the day of my donation.
It's not unusual afterwards to have some minor discomfort, specifically in the lower back area, which is the area where the bone marrow has been collected from. For the vast majority of donors, they say that this discomfort is quite minimal. It's typically taken away with the use of Tylenol, Motrin, Advil, for example, and these symptoms are usually gone within a few days.
After I donated bone marrow, I had pretty minimal side effects. I had a few sites on my lower back that were a little bit tender to the touch for a few days after I had donated. Aside from fatigue, I really didn't even need to take any Motrin or Tylenol or Advil or anything. Pretty easy recovery, and yeah, it was 2 or 3 days at max till I was back and back at the office, working, standing, sitting, without any trouble whatsoever. So
African Americans are the least likely to find a bone marrow match in the current registry. Part of this is because lots of African Americans have some hesitancy about the medical system, some hesitancy about whether it's safe to actually sign up to donate bone marrow, some hesitancy about what the procedures involve. It's really, really important that if you have questions, go to the Be The Match website, look at the testimonials, look at the videos, hear from donors themselves. Use this information with the trusted information from healthcare professionals, many who look like you, to help make the best decision. There are lots of African Americans with blood disorders or cancers or genetic illnesses who require a bone marrow transplant to live. Unfortunately, there are far fewer donors on the bone marrow registry who are a potential match for that patient. For this reason, it is so important that people who are African American, people who are Hispanic, that we get out, that we empower ourselves with the knowledge about the process, that we sign up to the bone marrow registry, and that if we are called to be a potential donor, we pick up the phone and we follow through.
There are, so many things in the world that you can do to leave a mark and to make the world a better place. And I just feel like as an African American, reading the statistics now and, understanding that my race is less likely to get a bone marrow donor, it's just like, it makes me all the more want to share my story, all the more want to encourage other people who look like me to sign up on the registry. My experience was amazing, totally so worth it.